Good afternoon. You're joining us at the Anniston Public Library, and we are having a virtual program about shade, which we need a lot of shade now in this hot weather. I'm Sherry Blanton. I'm a Calhoun County Master Gardener, and I also write the garden column in the Anniston-Star, the Southern Gardener. And you can find me on Facebook and in the Anniston-Star one Sunday a month. And you will now be able to find me on YouTube and on the Public Library's website. And I hope you'll join in. Shade is a much treasured thing. And we're going to get started. I called it Made in the Shades. I heard somebody say that one time. And before we get started, I'll mention that when I first started gardening some dozens of years ago, I thought it was really awful that I had so much shade, because every plant that I looked at said full sun, and I didn't have any full sun, and I thought that I was the ugly stepchild because I couldn't get all these full sun flowers. Little did I know that shade was absolutely wonderful. When I was a small girl, many, many decades ago, we did not have air conditioning. So we spent our summers out under a big shade pecan tree, and that's where I grew up. I'm sure there aren't very many children who sit under a shade tree reading a book. We didn't have a television. So I learned at a very young age that shade could really make a difference in your life. This is one of my favorite garden quotes, and I think it's something that really speaks to us now as we all shelter in our garden. When the world wearies and society ceases to satisfy, there is always the garden. And that is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful lily. And that's my two little fingers holding it up, because this lily has a growth habit of having its face hang down, and I was trying to take its picture. I love this idea, and I'll explain where I saw it. It's the first time I've ever seen anything like this, but I was trying to think exactly what is shade. If somebody said, well, Sherry, what is shade? And I tried to think, shade, what is shade? Shade is shelter from direct sunlight. And this is a shade sale. And the people put it up at Cane Creek Community Gardens because right behind it was a tree. And the tree fell over, and so they got sun on their little shade garden. So they put up this wonderful sale. And I know now I need one in my yard. I need to find a sunny place and make it a shady place. But I started looking up on Amazon because I'd never seen it. And there they were everywhere. And this is another shot from Cane Creek Community Gardens. And this is the difference between sun and shade, and they're building a native garden out there. So this really tells you the difference between a sun garden and a shade garden. And sitting under those trees, you really feel like a cup of sweet tea. You can get shade from a building, and many of us have that. And when you have shade from a building, it's kind of hard to not go with anything that doesn't like shade, especially if it's on the north side of your house. Then if you really want some shade and got some big bucks in your wallet, you can put up this beautiful pergola and make your own shade. And I think that's absolutely gorgeous. I haven't showed it to my husband and told him we needed one yet. I'm waiting to surprise him. Then it's really weird about shade because there's so many kinds of shade. And when I first started doing this, I didn't realize that everybody has a different idea of what shade is. And so I started to do some research, and this is what they call deep shade. It's very, very hard to get plants to live in deep shade. But this you can tell from the photograph, but they have plants living under there, and these are plants that have adapted to going without sunlight and living in the deep shade. And I'm surprised, I cannot tell what all is growing under there. It may just be some weedy ground cover, but normally plants do require some sunlight. So deep shade, you would never see any sun there. Now this is what they call full shade, and this is my backyard, and it looks very bright, but it's actually extremely shady back there. And this is what we call my Hosta farm. I liked the shade from the trees, and there were a lot of roots there, and it was very hard to dig. And Hayes Jackson, master plantsman, told me that hostas like to be in pots. So I created the Hosta farm back here, and this year I decided to enlarge on that theme, and I put a lot of caladiums who were shade lovers back there, and then I put some begonias, and then I've got different kinds of colors of hostas. And so these get shade from deciduous trees. That means that they do in the winter, they do get a little shade where the leaves fall off. Fortunately or unfortunately, these are all evergreens, so there's not a whole lot of shade that gets back there. But if shade gets on the edge of it, on the very side, the plants don't do as well. But whenever the guys who work for me come over and I say, we're going to refill all the pots in the hosta garden, they all say, we got to go do something else, because there's about 100 hostas back there. Then there's park shade. This is a path in my backyard that we walk through, and it gets the definition of park shade is 4 to 6 hours. But to complicate that, park shade is AM sun. That's the cool sun. It gets sun, but not enough to be considered full sun. Full sun is either 6 to 8 hours, but I can remember listening to speakers, and they talk about full shade as being 12 to 13 hours for a vegetable garden. Part sun is PM sun, and we all know that we have to run from the PM sun. Full sun is 6 to 8 hours a day or more, or all day, but there's a lot of difference of opinions. Some people said part shade was 4 hours. Some say the cutoff is 6 hours. So I just go with 4 to 6 hours. I figure that makes me safe. And this is my shade garden, and I've got Japanese maples back there, and I've got camellias, and I've got a lot of shade-loving ground covers, and I've got some native azaleas, and they all seem to like it back there, and they all do get some sun, but not a lot of sun. The best sun is something that we call dappled shade, light shade. Somebody else calls it transient sun, and it's the shade under tall trees, and that's like the perfect kind of sun is the dappled sun where it just comes through the trees. My problem with my part sun, dappled sun garden, dappled shade, is I had an alley behind my house, and it was fully shaded, and little by little, every one of those trees is falling over. So what used to be more dappled shade is now getting to be a little bit more sunny, and it's harder to keep the hydrangeas watered, because when I first planted this, it was pretty thick shade. What are some problems with shade? Oh, there are some big problems with shade, is root competition. How many of you ever have tried to dig where there were roots? I was trying to dig under a river birch about a week ago, and there's like a fine hairnet of little roots, and it's very hard to get through. It's hard to dig a hole. The plants have to compete with the trees for water and nutrients, and that makes it difficult on them, so you have to be very careful about what you plant under there. Or the soil can be too wet, or it can be too dry. Most of the time I see it as too dry, because sometimes the rain doesn't seem to be able to get through the tree canopy. And you see the root competition. If you can see the root behind my frog prints, that's the kind of roots that are coming out of this Japanese maple. So it's pretty hard to dig there. And I will tell y'all, in that little row, I have planted it probably 2 or 3 times to get something to grow there, and there's so much competition, it's hard for them to really get to be what they might be if they were not under those roots. Another thing is that plants that are planted with all this competition may not grow quite as quickly because they are competing with the roots. But in the back corner over there, I'm going to show that plant again. That is one of the best plants for shade. It's called a Rohdea or a Nippon lily, and it thrives in this kind of territory. And so does my frog prince. I have to squirt him down so I can keep the frog wet. Oh, now this is something that's happened to me more times than I even want to talk about. I read it as described as suddenly sun, but I'm going to tell y'all unexpected sun. My first experience with unexpected sun was when my neighbors cut all their trees down in their front yard. And their trees had been the barrier between the noon sun and my plants. And my plants I had this wonderful woodland shade garden, and all my plants just said, oh no, I'm going to dry up and die here. And some of them did. So of course the first thing I have to do is panic, run in and tell my husband, oh, the plants are in the sun and they like the shade. What am I going to do? And he'll shrug his shoulders and just move them. So, first step is I move the plants. And then the next step is to plant new trees. Then you can hope for the best and hope that the plants that are still out there will adjust if you water enough. Then you could put artificial shade, like that shade square. Well, this picture has a very sad story behind it. This is what I came out to on March 20th, 3 years ago. Coming up 3 years, 2.5 years ago from the tornado. This was my shade garden, and I had 2 enormous pine trees, and underneath them was my shade garden. Well, I came out that morning. I believe the tornado was March 18th. It's a day I don't try to remember. And they've already cut some of it off. And my trees were all gone, and there was nothing but sun. So one of my dear friends came over the next day, and she helped me dig up as much as we could that was left, and we moved it. And I said, I won't be beat. In 6 weeks, I had planted a complete new sun garden. And everything is little bitty, but I got what's called my rebirth tree, and I turned my shade garden into a sun garden. But I tell you today, I regret ever saying anything about my shade garden because I really miss it. Working in the sun and working in the shade are 2 very different animals. I can only go out here in this garden about 6 in the morning. Dry shade. Oh, wow. That's like the worst of the worst of the worst. So how do you deal with dry shade? Picking the right plants, improving the soil, making sure that you water those plants really well when you first plant them. And when all else fails, you plant them in containers or you go to raised beds. And this plant right here is called a cast iron plant. It will grow under a deck. It does not like sun, so any place that you have deep, even that deep shade, cast iron plants really do well. They don't have to be watered in the ground. Now, if you've got them in a pot, they require more water. And I do prune mine back because they can get a little bit shaggy looking around the edges, so I do keep them clipped back. Wet soil. Here you got to deal with wet soil. Again, you choose the right plants. Again, my fallback when I can't do anything else is I get a container, or you do a raised bed and you add your own soil and lift it up out of the wet. But there's always a perfect plant. Creeping Jenny likes wet soil in the shade. As a matter of fact, it is not crazy about being in the sun. Now, it is a perennial and it will disappear in the winter, but then it'll come back and it's beautiful. You can hang over a wall, hang over a pot, put it in a wet place, and it will, because it's chartreuse, it will really liven it up. Solutions. What do you do with a shade garden? Well, I've been really bored this summer and trying to think of new things I could do to my yard. So this is my new shade garden. And I had guys up here planting, and believe it or not, the guys could not get in the soil because of the tree roots, and I didn't want to damage the tree roots, so I came up with this idea. We'd move them away from the trees. We got bags and bags of topsoil. We put it all over the top of the soil to kind of, and spooned it in, but we didn't add the dirt around the tree roots. And you can also start with smaller plants so it's easier to dig the holes. And by the way, I need to mention this, that plants that grow in the shade may not get as big as plants that grow in the sun. And it's more difficult to find really colorful flowers that you do in the sun, see in the sun that you will see in the shade. And that comes from a process called photosynthesis, where plants turn energy into plants. I've almost got that right. I've been working on it. Plants use the sun to make food, and if they have less sun, they make smaller plants, and if they have more sun, they're more colorful. My biology teacher over here says, you've almost got it, but not quite. So anybody watching with a botany degree, and I didn't get that quite right, there is a difference between adaptation of shade plants and sun plants. I knew I shouldn't have gone for that one, but I thought I'd studied enough. So get smaller plants and know that they will not get as big as some of the plants that get more sun. Oh, here's something that I love to do. And whenever I walk in anybody's yard, I say, you know, you need to layer up those trees so you can get more plants underneath them. This is another shot of the Hosta garden, and you can see there's a lot more than hostas under there. There's hydrangeas, there's fatsias, there's potted plants, there's a daphne sitting on the edge. So layer up the limbs, and then you've got more room, and you can let more light in, and therefore the plants that need it can get a little more sunlight. Use containers. This is another shot of the Hosta farm, but every plant under there but the cast iron plant is in a pot. Hayes Jackson told me about 20 years ago that hostas grew better in pots than they did in the ground. So I determined that every hosta I planted was going to have to be in a pot. And I decided they were so close together that nobody would know if I had nice pots or crummy pots. Most of these are nice because I was in the pot collection business for a while. And that is a shade garden. It looks bright, but that is shade. And I have limbed up, that is Loropetalum, the biggest Loropetalum I've ever seen in my life. It's way over my house. And a banana shrub, and they're both limbed up, and they can both give you lots of shade, but you have a lot of room to have a garden. Now, I know all of you people who are watching are going to run outside and see what you can limb up to put more pots under it, and I heartily recommend that. Gives you lots of space for little flowers. One of the most important things that you can do when you have a shady garden that's kind of dark is put white or light colors, and it'll brighten the shady corners. I love white shade caladiums, and they just sparkle. They sparkle at night in a moon garden, and during the day they just jump out at you. This is another picture of the Hosta garden, and you can see that I have a few impatiens that came up, and I have a hydrangea that my sister gave me that's blooming over there in the corner. And everybody seems to be very happy. And by the way, I've been asked how many caladiums did you plant, and I think it's about 300. And I intend to take up every one of them, dry them out, and save them for next year, which you can do in a place that's over 65 degrees, because I'm going to fill my whole backyard up with caladiums next year. use plants to provide color. You don't just need perennial color or annual color. You can use the plants for your color. And if you'll see that we've got some plants that have a white border, then if you look around, there are some plants that are very, very dark green. And then you see a hosta that's chartreuse, and then a Lenten rose that's very green and shiny. Now on the edge is a phlox, and it does get some sun because it's on the end of the tree. And another nice shady plant is columbine, and that's to your right. So you get plants with different colors and textures to brighten up your shade garden, because since maybe you're not using color, you just use different colors of plants. And what's nice is if you repeat the same color throughout your shade garden, and that's something I'm really going to work on in my own garden. I'm a real onesie person. I like one of this and one of that and one of that one over there, and I've decided that I was going to go for massing and that I was going to have different clumps of the masses so it would kind of carry your eye around the garden. And the main thing that gardeners always say, master gardeners, is plant for year-long interest. So we've got some things in there that stay green all winter long. We've got some things that come up in the spring and die back in the summer. And then we've got some things that are beautiful in the summer and quiet during the winter and a little quieter during the summer. The onesie person, which I am, has learned to mass plants. I was reading a book and it said, think of the difference between one Japanese painted fern and a bunch of them. Well, there's Japanese painted ferns have their own habit. They start with one and they make their own mass. But I started looking around and I realized that things in a group had more impact. The neat thing about the Japanese painted fern, it's got a lot of white on it. It looks like it's been painted. So you also get something to beef up your shady corners. Annuals are great for color, and if you can't get them in the ground, hey, get a big container. This is a half whiskey barrel, and I put as many white begonias as I could in it, and then I put it in a shady place so it would make a really great statement in a shady corner. And if you see over there, yes, you do see some wire, because I had armadillos and they were eating everything, so I put wire up around my azaleas. They still figured out how to climb in. This is a gorgeous annual that is not seen and not used enough around here. It's called a Torrenia, or a wishbone flower, and this is a gorgeous shade annual. But it does like to be watered, and if you don't water it, it'll wilt on you really quick. But I did very well this year and have not had another wilt. They come in white, they come in yellow, they come in bicolored, and they spill, and they're just cheery and wonderful, and I love them. Okay, you're going to say, okay, Sherry, why are you showing a sun impatiens in your shade garden? Because a sun impatiens is not a sun plant. It is a shade plant. And if you put it in all-day sun, which it says it likes, the word sun is there, it will get all leggy and very ugly. And it will need to be watered at least twice a day. So I don't know if any of you watching noticed the fact that there were no impatiens on the market this year. And I happened to watch a blog, and they got something called downy mildew. There were no impatiens at Lowe's. There were no impatiens at Home Depot. There were no impatiens at Walmart. But you can get these sun impatiens because they're really big, because people think they can plant them in the sun and just put them in the shade. And there are some more of my caladiums that I love, but I do. And the other thing that's happened to me in the last 2 years is that I've loved to love orange. And I told my sister, who is also a crazy gardener, and I told her I was planting orange, and said, ooh, but orange is terrific in a shade garden or a sun garden. Coleus, everybody knows the Coleus. They often are labeled for sun, but I found out if you put a sun Coleus in the sun, it will wilt quicker than you can turn around. So I put mine in the shade, and this one has not wilted the whole year. It's really, really, really outstanding. I love the chartreuse around it. This is another beautiful plant that it is in the sun. This is another Coleus. And you see that it's getting sun on it. I have to go out every day and water this Coleus because it's just getting enough sun that it's gotten a little bit leggy, and it's gotten, it gets very wilty. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I look out and I'll say to my husband, would you please go out and water the Coleus? Look how wilted it is. But the neat thing is, as soon as you water it, it perks right back up again. And if you want to and you want more of them, all you have to do is break off a piece and put it in water, and pretty soon you have a whole lot more Coleuses, and that's how I got many, many last year. Okay, in a shade garden, other things that you can do to make it interesting. Have a beautiful tree trunk. This is a Natchez white crepe myrtle, and it has just recently finished shedding its bark, and it really is something special, and you can see all the shade plants around it. And all of these guys do very well because crepe myrtles have very competitive roots and sprouts and whatever. But this combination of cast iron plants, Solomon seal, Helleborous, and I've got some Rohdea in there right in the front. They have done just beautifully under there, and I do water it, but mostly Mother Nature waters it. And something that I have noticed, that if you commit crepe murder and butcher your plants, your beautiful trees, the bark does not get as beautiful as it does if you just leave them alone. Now, a river birch, if you want interest in a shade garden, a river birch is really exceptional, and because the canopy is so high up, it gets the sun because river birch likes sun, but under that canopy, you get the shade plants. And long time ago, this was a sun garden, and I had daylilies under it and daffodils and irises, and little by little, we've had to, as this tree grew, those started to falter. They were not plants that could exist on less sunlight. So we've been moving them and digging them up and putting them where there's more sun and planting shade plants under here. Now, you can always have whimsy in a shade garden if you want to just dress it up a little bit. And this is my husband's frog. He came from a store called Plant Odyssey in Birmingham, and he sits under a little tree, and most everybody who sees him admires him. The first time the dog saw him, she was quite taken back. She didn't really understand what it was. Another thing you can do to dress up your yard, if it's very shady, is use hardscape. You can use beautiful walls and paths and buildings and raised beds. And in mine, I have a dry stream that goes from one end of the yard to the other, and it came for a reason. I'm the lowest house on the block, so when it rains, I always get flooded, and my yard used to look like a small river, so we came in and added these rocks, and now they've become a beautiful part of the yard and hardscaping. But I've seen one beautiful, beautiful yard that has the most glamorous rock fences and walls and paths and stairs, and you can't imagine what that will do for a garden. It just opens up your garden to so many possibilities. This is a plant I talked about earlier, the Rohdea, and a hint for anybody who'd like some, there were a lot of them at Longleaf Botanical Gardens, and they have a sale by appointment every Wednesday afternoon. And if you want something that will take absolute dry shade, this will do it. And I actually have some that ended up in the sun when my dogwood tree died. And it is partially in the sun, and it doesn't look anything like this. This is probably one of the most underused plants there can be. This is a very, very large patch of this beautiful green. It doesn't have any pests. It doesn't get any diseases. It doesn't ask anything of me. I will trim back the shaggy leaves once a year, but this one in the shade doesn't get any shaggy leaves. Wild ginger is the sweetest little ground cover, little heart-shaped leaves, and if you look on some of the online catalogs, there are hundreds of these. And this is a jewel in a woodland garden, and it does increase, but it's not got bad manners. Okay, I wanted to make a point about this plant. Whenever I'm going to do a program, I have to buy a lot of books. It gives me an excuse to buy books, and it gives me something to do at night to look at pretty pictures. And one of the books recommended this plant for a shade garden, and I thought, where has your mind gone? This is a chameleon plant. When you first plant it, it's variegated. It's got some red on it and some white. As it hangs around, it turns to green. Yes, it does have that charming flower, but once it's in your yard, it will never, ever leave, ever. It spreads by underground stolons and also by seeds. And if I ever go to a nursery and I see them for sale, I say, you should not be selling that plant. That's a really horrible plant. I've dug it up at least 100 times, and I turn around and it's back again. It does make a nice ground cover if you want to put it 2 miles from your house. But I could not believe that this beautiful book recommended this flower. What's a shade garden without ferns? This is an autumn fern, which I'm growing to love more and more every day. It's got some copper in it and some white. And I've sold lots of friends on this fern, and I hope they're all going to still like me at the end of the year because of how many people I talked into getting this fern. My sister has them, and she says they're magnificent. And since she is the rabid gardener like I am, I always trust her. But this is in my new little garden that I'm forming. And you can plant them about 2 feet apart, and they don't seem to have, the deer don't eat them. That's the first thing that's wonderful. And I do keep them watered, but I'm not standing out there all the time with the hose. Oh, excuse me, I flipped past. Okay, here's another fern that's masked, and I love them, and I've decided to add a lot more ferns to my backyard shade garden because they will disappear in the winter, but they'll be right back in the spring, and they're really beautiful. I don't know the name of this fern, but there is one called Lady in Red that looks a lot like it, but I don't think, Lady in Red does not look quite like this fern, and it's been out in my yard for years, so I don't remember the name of it. And of course, Hosta. That's the epitome of the shade plants. And there you can see the Hosta garden, which has its own sprinkler, because hostas have to be watered. They will pout and go dormant if they're not watered. But you see, look at all the colors. Got dark green and light green, green and white, chartreuse, all the different shades of green that are mixed in here that kind of make a palette. So you get your color. If you don't have your flowers, you can get your colors from the greens and all the different kinds of leaves. So if you are planting hostas, I would recommend that you plant them in pots, and that way the roots get colder and they do better. Now if you're like Hayes, you get voles who come and eat them in the ground, so that's another reason to put them in a pot. And I just think they have more presence when they're up in a pot, and it's a reason to collect containers. And you see right in the middle, I put a white begonia in the pot with one of the hostas. But they surely add Now, if you have deer, a deer and a hosta are like me going to the bakery. I've got to have every kind of cookie. and the deer will decimate these in a heartbeat. So I kind of try to put them where the deer can't get to them. Here's just probably one of my favorite hostas. I do not know the name. I've had it for years, but that will surely brighten up a shady spot. Here's another plant that I love and was collecting, heucheras. And I looked up the pronunciation so I could get it right, because I was saying heuchera, and my sister said, no, that's wrong. It's heuchera. This is a wonderful evergreen shade perennial. It will look almost as pretty in the winter as it does in the summer, and you can see all the shade and the little bit of dappled sun on it. And you can see all the different color. The new leaves are red and the old leaves are lighter green. There must be 100 or more cultivars of heucheras. They have names that are in apostrophes, and so that you can make sure that you get them all different. This year I did something really neat. I bought 3 of the same one and put them on my front porch on a bench. And I'm really pleased with the look. Instead of going for onesies, I masked them. And that can be an incredible experience. Most everybody's got Lenten roses. If you don't, get some. They multiply. They stay green all year. The deer don't eat them. They don't appear to have any diseases. They start blooming in late December, January. And they have little flowers on them through all spring, and then they reseed. The only thing about the reseeding is the absolutely plain ones reseed much better than the fancy ones. This is a fancy one. Right now I can't tell you what its name is. These do not spread, but if you just buy the plain old Lenten roses, what was one will soon be 1,000, and I like them because a mass bed of these under a shade tree is a glory in January. This is another plant that you do not see enough. It is underused, underutilized, and undersold in this area. You pretty much have to buy it online. It's called an epimedium or a barrenwort. It is also a ground cover. Now, I've always heard it like dry shade, but when I was doing my research, I read that it actually likes some moisture. And so I'm just looking to see what the difference is going to be between the ones in dry shade and the ones that I'm watering. And this is a perennial, so it will disappear over the winter. And just when you need it really badly, it'll come back. I have a yellow one, a red one, a white one, and I'd like to have a lot more of them, but they're pricey. And so I've tried to be good about how many I bought. Solomon seal. All you need is a friend who's got a bed of Solomon seal, and you say, can I have one? And pretty soon you'll have hundreds of them. But this is a great plant. This is another shade garden, and it's mixed with Rohdeas, and it's mixed with Lenten roses. And in the spring, the early spring, it will have little tiny flowers on it. I've never seen the deer eat it, and it is gorgeous when it's masked. And I'm trying to plant these all over my yard because they are so dear. There's also Solomon seals that are solid green. I like the ones with a little bit of white around the edges. Lamium. I did not know that this was a plant that was a happy spreader because I keep mine in pots, so they never have gotten obnoxious. But this will pretty much last all year. It won't always look this prim and proper, but I keep mine in pots. I like the white because it cheers things up. And it has, this one had finished blooming, but it'll be covered with little pink flowers. And the pollinators love the pink flowers. Now, I did notice that a piece of this broke off and rooted in the flower bed next to it, but I don't really mind it. I think it's beautiful, and until it shows me it has bad manners, I'm going to let it be. This is probably one of my very, very favorite shade plants. It's a Trillium. you usually see it with kind of a burgundy flower, and I'm not sure where I got this one with the little white flower, but somehow or another they will spread around the yard. I guess it's the birds and the bees are spreading it, but this is a perfectly charming little shade flower. And if you don't have any, you need to get them, because the first time you go out next winter and the trilliums are up, you will just be cheering, and you know you've made it through a winter, and look at your trillium, and you have to run get your camera and take a picture of it, post it on Facebook, let everybody know your trillium's up. Color from foliage. You don't necessarily have to have a flower. Foliage is wonderful flowers. These are white with a little shade of pink, and these again are in my Hosta garden, but now I've got them planted all over my yard. I will take my husband out and I'll say, is this not look just like a painting? And he'll say yes. And he happens to like them a lot, so he did not mind how many boxes came. And right behind it, over to the right, is a Japanese Fatsia, and it looks like it's diseased, but it's not. It looks like it's actually got like little spider webs all over the top, and it's a really beautiful plant for shade. And I didn't have a place to dig, so I put it in a pot, and it seems to be happy. But I've been ordering quite a lot of flowers, and they kept coming and coming and coming. Finally, this big box came, and my husband came in, and he says, "What is that? Are you putting those in the house?" I said, "Nope. Those are the caladiums to go outside." And he said, "Okay." But for several years, I saved them and planted them again, and believe it or not, they did fine. This year, I'm going to save them because I'm going to fill up my backyard and my front yard. What's a shade garden without endless summer hydrangea? This is a rebloomer. I just gave mine a haircut a couple of weeks ago because it had gotten kind of leggy, and that needs to be done in July. And you see it's getting a little bit of sun. You can see the sun on it, but a hydrangea will practically say, "I hate you," if it sits in the hot sun. This is a perfect shade plant. I would put this in dappled shade or light shade because it does need to I would not put this in the darkest shade because I think that it probably needs some sun to really flower. Oakleaf Hydrangea. This was in my shade garden in the back when it was really, really, really shady, and it's no longer really, really shady, but it's been out there and it's adapted. Everybody knows that Oakleaf Hydrangea is a state wildflower of Alabama, and there's so many that you can get. You can get a double, you can get a single, and they're beautiful when they bloom. But one must for an Oakleaf Hydrangea is has to have good drainage. If it doesn't, it's not very happy. And mine got really tall and leggy, and so about a year ago I gave them a haircut just because the flowers were over my head and I wanted to see them. But I got this at Aldridge's Gardens long, long time ago. It was Aldridge's Gardens and Nursery, and they had a big garden around the shop. It's now just Aldridge's Gardens, and they no longer have a nursery store. But this, when we went to the little shop, I first saw these, and they had a wonderful store that's now, I think, a CVS in Birmingham. This is one of my husband's favorite flowers. It's Pieris japonica. It is a late winter blooming, and it's got little white flowers all over it, and this does not want to be in the full sun. This is one of those dappled shade type people, and the flowers look very much like chandeliers when they droop down. Here is another great shade lover. This is black scallop aguga. And I have a friend whose cat is named Mr. Aguga. And I promise you that this aguga gets in less trouble than that cat does. But I believe the owner of that cat gave me this aguga. And it's gorgeous. It's got huge leaves on it and are kind of black looking. And they are a great shade plant. Just let them go. Now, I've had some that have not done well and have died, but this one has just done beautifully. I don't know how it got to the place that it's in because I didn't plant it there, so I imagine some bird must have helped it. This is something else that I'm really, really into now. It's Carex, which is a kind of sedge. It's evergreen all year long. It is a perfect shade lover. As a matter of fact, it doesn't want to be in the sun. It does like to be watered in the summer. And there are so many to choose from. When I get some of these catalogs, I don't even know what to do. I have to carry the catalog out to the trash can. I don't remember the name of this because I've lost the label, but I have them in every color and size. This is a plant I learned about from my sister, and she was giving me guidance on it the other day. It's a Pachysandra. It's a ground cover for shade, as my sister told me. Pachysandra does not like the sun, but something that's so weird about my Pachysandra is I have had it for probably 15 years, and it never, ever spread. This year, I took out 2 plants, so there's more water, and it's doing very well, and my sister says that it does well in the roots of trees because hers was under a huge oak, and she said, does not like the sun. Cast iron plant. Don't have to say too much about a cast iron plant, except go for it. If you've got even the deepest shade and you want something pretty, plant a cast iron plant. And believe it or not, there are all kinds of cast iron plants. There's even one named for Hayes Jackson that's got little spots on it. You can see this one's got a stripe down the middle. And then there's the one we all know that's solid green. But it's a really good shade plant. You know, you just probably can't beat it to death with a stick. You might have to cut off a dead leaf every once in a while, but it just goes on its own. Japanese Fatsia is one of my very favorites because I think it adds a tropical look to the garden. It is a very hardy evergreen. The only thing I do to this plant is pick up. It sheds leaves. When the old leaves die, that goes through a cycle, they turn yellow and fall off. And one day I had this very anxious call from my sister to tell me that her Fatsia leaves were turning yellow. And I said, it's the cycle of life. But this I keep in the shade. I've seen it in the sun, but this is one of my great shade plants. It can get huge. So if you want to plant it, give it plenty of space. Upright Yew is another great shade plant. It fits in the corner and it adds different texture to your shade garden. I've had this one quite a long time, and it's probably about as big as I am, about 5 feet tall, and I keep it pruned around so it doesn't get really wide because of the spot it's in. Here's its cousin, not really, but prostate yew. This gets to be about 3 feet tall, and it's really a ground cover, but this is fabulous in the shade. Now, my sister put hers in the sun, and hers turned a little yellow. They may take some sun, but mine's in dappled sun, and it's absolutely beautiful. And this is another one. It asks nothing of me. Doesn't get any bugs, doesn't get any diseases, doesn't care about being watered, doesn't care about being pruned. It's just beautiful. Now, here's an oldie but goodie that people go, oh, yeah, been there, done that. A Cuba will take dry shade, and it's bright and cheerful, and the leaves are green and yellow spotted. They also come in solid green. So I'm gaining a new appreciation for my Cubas because my sprinkler does not ever touch them, and they stay like this. So it's gone up in my Love This Plant book. I started to cut it down, and I think, oh, no, that would have been a mistake. Mahonia. Now, you've got to be really careful if you get a Mahonia. It is a great shade plant, but there are some of them that are very invasive. So read all about your Mahonias before you buy one. See the little yellow flowers? They turn to little berries. and then the birds drop the little berries, and then the little berries come up and turn into plants, and they get everywhere, and they have the Mahonia that most of us know that's got the terrible sticky leaves on it, that's now on the invasive list. I believe this is a Chinese Mahonia, but I've had it 20 years and I don't remember anymore. This is a wonderful Japanese maple that loves the shade. There are some Japanese maples that like the shade and some that like the sun, and this one's in the shade, and it's probably one of my very favorite. It's just really, it looks almost like a painting. It doesn't even look real. The shape of the leaves and the colors and the way the leaves, the way they droop down. You can put a little Japanese maple in the middle of your shade garden. It just needs to get enough sun to flourish. But you can put one in a container if you don't want to dig down in the soil, and just make it a little accent point and put it in a beautiful bright pot, cobalt blue or bright green or burgundy, and just let it be there as an accent point. Mountain laurel. Mountain laurels don't traditionally like it here, but for some reason this one did. It was much more shaded, and it's still, I lost all these trees in the alley so it gets more sun, but mountain laurels are much happier in North Carolina or North Alabama, but they do here. And look how beautifully this one is blooming. It's really gorgeous. Deutzia, slender Deutzia nico. This is about, it's about 3 or 4 feet tall, 5 feet. These are some of the things that I had in my woodland garden that the tornado ripped up. So we dug them up and put them in another place in the shade. This is a beautiful little shade plant. It is deciduous in the winter, and then the spring it puts out these delightful little white flowers. It's not so special in the summer. It doesn't do as great in the heat, but I think that one of mine is in too much sun, and that's why it doesn't look as good as it did for the ones that were in the woodland garden in the shade. And that is all of them. Folks, there are so many, many, many plants that will grow in a shade garden. Please don't be like me and felt like the ugly stepsister because all I had was shade. Because when I'm working out in the yard now, I'd much rather be working out in that shade garden than I would in my full sun garden. Much, much, much. And if I were going to take a chair out and sit, I'd be sitting in the shade garden with my flowers, not in my sun garden. So if you've got a patch of shade, make use of it. If you've got something you can limb up to make yourself a little shade garden, go for it. Shade is wonderful. And if anybody has a question, I will be back here in a month, and we are going to talk about fall flowers. But today, when I was looking through some books, I decided we're also going to talk a little bit about fall chores, because fall is a busy time of the year for gardeners. There's a lot you have to accomplish before winter comes. So we're going to talk a lot about fall flowers and look at some beautiful pictures, but we're going to talk about things to help the gardener get ready for winter and the plants get ready for winter. And hope that during fall we do not get one of those ridiculous freezes the first week in November, second week in November, and the temperatures go from like 75 to 32, and the plants are all saying, "What's up, Doc?" And we're saying, "Where's our winter coat?" But anyway, thank you, anybody who's joined us. I'm going to work on that definition of photosynthesis, and by the next time you see me, I'm going to have it down perfect. I need my cheat sheet to read it from. That's something all gardeners need to know about. The most important takeaway from this is I'm going to end with one sentence. Plant the right plant in the right place. Plant a plant that likes shade in a shade garden, and a plant that likes sun in the sun. Because if you do it any other way, nobody's going to be happy, including you. Thank you for joining us. Enjoy it. Thank you for the library for letting us come and do something virtually to keep us gardeners busy and to help educate. Thank you.